I will be reading from Romans 13, 1 through 7. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against God, against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor.
As we've been hearing the writings of the early church, we've seen how the theology and topics that writers talk about vary a lot, and how these different concerns and ideas will pop up and stand out in different messages between churches. Today, we're going to highlight one of those themes that jumps out in the book of Romans because it's an important line of understanding that undergirds a lot of the New Testament writings. The relationship of the church to the state. Let's ignore for the moment the possibility that this passage was inserted into the text much later than the original letter during a time when the state adopted Christianity as the official religion. Let's set that possibility aside. Romans was written in a time when Christian involvement in the state was unthinkable. Once Rome did adopt Christianity, that is when it completely tore apart. In half, actually, because the theological, political, social differences between the two poles of the empire were so irreconcilable. There were emperor cults, which deified the emperor and worshipped his power and the power of Rome. They believed Rome was divinely blessed and a force of good across the known world, especially in the face of those uncivilized peoples across their borders to the north. As Rome found out, there's no such thing as a Christian nation. And this contemporary idea of Christian nationalism is a poison not only to our nation, but to Christianity. As we've been hearing in the epistle reading so far this summer, the bad theology of one community or sect of the church is damaging to everyone. Christian nationalism is bad theology. It's hardly theology at all. It's emperor cult worship dressed up in churchy language. Early church writers are constantly combating this reality in which the poor theology or wrong teachings poison the entirety of the church. In the early church, persecutions happened when one community made a bad name for the whole. Everyone was punished for the craziness of a few. So it's no surprise when the writer of Romans makes the case for the church keeping its head down and submitting to the powers of government. We can't win with violence. In fact, the entirety of the church, the foundational doctrine displayed in the resurrection of Jesus, is that violent power is not true power. This passage in Romans could be rephrased to say, government has its place, but it's best to leave it alone. Although the writers would probably not have much of a concept of representational government, this did just basically crumble about 75 years before this with the Roman Republic. The idea of a system of government founded on the participation of the general public would not have been in mind at all. Now, our system of government here today was not founded on Christian values or morals, but on the idea that everyone should participate in their own governing because of the radical philosophy that everyone has certain rights. Of course, initially it was just landowning white men, but we've seen the evolution come around to at least attempt to acknowledge the rights of all people. These rights and freedoms are not given by force or violence, but endowed by our Creator, whoever that might be. Notice how vague that language is, and intentionally so. They could have said God or the Lord or even Jesus Christ, but instead, they went with what would have been perceived as a non-religious, universal notion of Creator. It's almost to say, however we came to be, whatever being or force created us, our very being gives us endowed rights that are universal and inalienable. This is philosophical language, not theological. But notice how over time that language has been shifted and morphed into a glorification of the state. Haven't we all heard how our rights were given to us by those who served our country in war? Seems to be a sub-theme of just about every country song this time of year. When we encounter something that we can't justify on moral grounds, we flower up the language around it and package it up to equate the state with our Creator. We juxtapose these concepts into a narrative that tries to unite Christian and nationality into something that becomes antithetical to Christianity and antithetical to the foundations of our nation. On the one hand, you have a country founded on the ideals of personal liberty, lifting up the rights and independence of all people, and it's twisted into something that imposes a very specific and minority Christian doctrine onto all people. On the other hand, you have a church whose core principle is that the powers of force and coercion are not power at all, and it's twisted into a glorification of violence and the narrative that might makes right. What a sham. What a disgusting cancer this is to the church and the nation. And yet, notice how popular and pervasive this narrative is. It's not just when people spout overtly Christian nationalist language. It's the many ways in which the language of the church and religion becomes the language of patriotism and vice versa. Historically, Anabaptists have refused to say the Pledge of Allegiance because of being very sensitive to what it says and the intent behind it. Pledging allegiance to a symbol of the state would be absolutely appalling to Paul and the early church. Teaching it to children to say on a daily basis, when they obviously have no idea what it means, that's nationalist indoctrination. Forget the uncomfortable content in literature. Here we're bolstering propaganda of emperor cult worship, and we don't bat an eye. Christian nationalism is so pervasive in our vernacular, we don't even realize the ways in which we perpetuate it. That's probably the point. The subversive nature of this poisonous theology infiltrates society with the idea that since Christianity is the largest religion, it must be treated as the norm. But that was also one of the largest downfalls of Rome. Where Rome was built as an empire of local autonomy, diversity, the church destroyed it. Rome had its problems throughout its last few hundred years, But towards the end of the 4th century, the emperor decided that courting Christians with power would lead to his political success. And he wasn't wrong. Constantine gained immense power both within the church and the state. But it wasn't long before the church started to impose itself across the empire and destroy everything that didn't fit into its understanding of the world. This broke Rome, eventually splitting it right down the middle. Our system of government today is majority rule, but it protects the rights of the minority. The revolutionary idea that even if a majority of the population believes something, that doesn't give the state the right to impose it on the minority against their rights. That's no doctrine, be it religious or social, can tread on the rights of the people. The idea of a Christian nation threatens this understanding because it tells those who are not Christian, and even those who are not a certain type of Christian, that if you do not adhere to this narrow understanding of what it means to be Christian and what it means to be American, then you don't belong. We hear this rhetoric all the time, and it should make us shudder. When we hear about non-citizens being the scapegoat for all of our discomforts, when we see certain ethnic or racial groups reduced to talking points, when we have some vision in our minds about what an American believes or looks like, this will be our undoing. Push against it, denounce it, run from it, because that's not who the church or our nation are. The country is young and has some tough lessons to learn. The church, however, is 2,000 years old, and we should know better. We should have learned this lesson many times over. And yet, we are worldly enough to crave power and to chase the notion that we can right the world with the tools of the state. Instead, we should participate in a system that we should also keep at arm's length. We do not put our faith in the gods of the state, the gods of symbols and violence. We maintain our faith elsewhere and hope that the state lives up to its own ideals. We, as people of God, seek the peace of the place in which we find ourselves. May it be so.
Please join me in the prayer of response. God, our security, who alone can defend us against the principalities and powers that rule this present age? That in dying we may live. Through Jesus Christ. Amen.
We'll have our time of sharing and announcements. If you have anything to share, prayer requests, joys, concerns, please raise your hand and Joel will bring a microphone.
So we have Kathy Google and her grandkids on our prayer list. So I wanted to give you an update. Hannah is home. She had surgery on her arm, which was broken. And she also has a neck brace on. She has a broken vertebrae. But she's doing okay. Josiah, he has been in